Ladies and gentlemen, if you bring in yourselves to orders, hopefully we'll find our legal officer in a minute, who is not here, which is the cause for the slight delay at the moment. While that's happening, I will do the public service announcements. There is no fire drill scheduled for this evening, fortunately. So if the fire alarm does go off, it is a genuine emergency. So please wait while the Democratic Services Officer finds a safe path out of the building and hopefully returns to tell us what it is. Hopefully. Secondly, may I ask whether any members of the public or indeed councillors are intending to record this, the proceedings this evening? We do obviously have our own webcasting service. I ask this not in the interest of preventing anyone from so doing, but simply in order to notify any members of the public and councillors if anyone is doing that thing. No, I don't see anyone indicating, so I will assume that no one is going to do that. Proceeding rapidly on, I proceed with the other housekeeping things. Apologies for absence. Councillor Perry apologises for his absence.
I've also received apologies from Councillors Powell and Round.
Thank you very much. Take notification of substitute members. Councillor Burton for...
Councillor Burton for Councillor Round.
Councillor Garland for...
John Perry.
Thank you very much. Any other substitute members? No. Notification of visiting members. I see Councillor Mrs Sams sitting over. Are you wishing to speak? Okay, you're still technically visiting, but okay, thank you. Item 4, items withdrawn from the agenda. Hopefully we don't have any, as it's a short agenda. No items withdrawn from tonight's agenda. Item 5, any business the Chairman regards as urgent, including the urgent update report as it relates to matters to be considered at this meeting. Is it agreed, members, that we take the urgent update and urgent update report? Thank you. Item 6, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? No. Disclosures of lobbying I will take with the relevant applications. Item 8, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I am not aware of any this evening. No, there are none. So we now proceed on to the applications before us this evening. The first application on item 10, page 24 of your report is a starred item. The only person down to speak is for the applicant. May I ask members whether they are intending to speak on this application? No, thank you. Mr. Street, do I see Mr. Street? Over there. You heard that members do not want this application introduced and do not intend to speak on it. Do you waive your right? Yes, I will. Thank you very much. In that case, I will just check whether anyone's been lobbied on this application. Councillor Prendergast, you're indicating, I think. And Councillor Stockwell. And myself. I have also been lobbied. And Councillor Hastie, Councillor Ball. And anyone not been lobbied? Should they do that easy? This is for number 1, Fancy Row, Fernham Lane. Thank you. Right. I'm taking declarations of lobbying, despite the fact we're not going to have it introduced, just for the record. And I will draw members' attention to the fact there is an urgent update.
Sorry, can we just have a handout who was lobbied and not so?
Yeah, we'll do that lobbying again, please. Lobbying. Number 1, Fancy Row, I was lobbied on it. No one else then, good. Right. There is an urgent update report on the papers, members. I will move the recommendation to approve with the urgent update. Thank you very much indeed. That amends condition 8 for the record. All those in favour of the application, please indicate. That is everyone, so congratulations. Have a nice evening. The application's approved. We now move on to item 9 on page 1 of your agendas. I'll ask the officer to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I will briefly introduce the application. Happy to answer any questions subsequently. The application is for 6 detached homes in Bredhurst and the conversion of an existing barn to a community use. I will briefly take you through some photographs of the site. The barn to be converted to community use is shown there. And now we have some site views of the adjoining site boundaries. This is the frontage of the site. Forge Lodge, we saw the rear of that a moment ago. Internal view of the site looking south. The old post office adjoining the Forge Lane. The area adjoining the barn. View of Condor's house to the south. And the site again. And this is a computer-generated image of the proposed housing scheme and a bird's-eye view of that with the community barn forward of this representation. This is a site plan of the proposal. I'll briefly introduce the proposal itself. It's an irregularly shaped site with a relatively narrow access from Forge Lane in terms of the frontage, the old post office here, the Grade 2 listed Green Court here, Condor House over here. The site is within a special landscape area and the North Downs area of outstanding natural beauty and forms part of a strategic gap. A majority of the site away from the road is outside the settlement boundary, and the proposal is recommended for refusal. The proposal includes a community building, as I've mentioned in passing. This includes the installation of a WC and kitchen and is subject of some local support. There are a number of housing schemes that are relevant in the area which are included within the appendix to your report, not on these slides unfortunately, where we go through in some detail relevant cases, some of which have been refused on an appeal dismissed on Forge Lodge, erection of 3-bedroom dwelling approved on Blind Lane, a 4-unit scheme approved on 3 Blind Lane, and an appeal pending on another site north of Blind Lane. So an area of some development pressure, albeit ANOB. There are, I should point out, one correction, which is the proposed community building is put forward to have 5 car parking spaces rather than 3. That's in paragraph, referred to in paragraph 5.03, just for reference. So moving on, the key issues really, I'll focus on the key issues. First of all, it's the principal development in an area of outstanding natural beauty and the impact on that, the strategic gap and the special landscape area. And in summary, while the site is somewhat enclosed, and it's shown in red here, officers are of the opinion that there is some damage to the AONB and that the None of the exceptions to policy ENV 28 apply, and therefore this represents a departure to the development plan and damages to the ANOB. I think it's fair to say that while the community building is obviously welcomed, in some respects there is no requirement for that building, and certainly if it was put forward as part of a Section 106 agreement, it would be considered contrary to the civil tests because it is not required, it's not meeting any undefined needs. Issues such as the fact that the existing community hall is too expensive or too large for certain activities is not material in planning terms. So I think in summary, the key issues really are the effect on the ANOB and the strategic special landscape area, I should say, and the strategic gap between Bredhurst and the M2 to the south, which officers feel are damaged by this proposal, and that there are no material issues which mitigate against that contravention. So the recommendation, which has been amended in the urgent update, is to refuse within the urgent update. The reference has been made, thank you very much, reference has been made to the fact the site is mainly outside the settlement boundaries of Bredhurst, and you will notice within the appendix of the report that boundary is clearly shown. There's also some concern from the landscape officer about the proposal leading to pressure to fell and carry out inappropriate tree works harmful to the visual amenity of the site. So the list of policies which officers consider the proposal to be contrary to is within that recommendation. I think I'll pause there and I'll hope to answer any questions you may have shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to ask the legal officer just to outline how the public speaking works this evening, such as it is. You're on, your light's on. Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a short announcement for members of the public.
No, it's not. It's been turned off. You're on. You're on.
Sorry.
You're on already. Your light is on.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This short announcement for members of the public, and in particular those who are speaking on an item this evening. As you just heard, the item will be announced by the chairman, and then the planning officer will introduce the item. The chairman will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please could you come forward to the table in front of you and take a seat. To speak, press the middle button. You do not need to hold it down. The button will turn green and the ring around the mouthpiece on the microphone will turn red. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll see ordinarily I would say you'd see your time count down on the screen behind me, but our computer systems are not working, so I'll be doing it manually on a phone. There will be a noise which will be emanating from this, which will sound like a ringtone, but that is in effect the end of your time. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button. Again, it will turn white and then return to your seat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our first speaker this evening is Councillor Carr on behalf of Bredhurst Parish Council.
Shall I start? Right, I've pushed it, yeah, it's pushed. Right, I'm Nicola Carr, Vice Chairman of Bredhurst Parish Council, and come here to speak on behalf of Bredhurst Parish Council. This small development, it's in the centre of the village and is surrounded on all sides by houses already. The only area visible to the public is about 30 metres in Forge Lane, which at the moment is a patch of rough ground, a flint barn in poor repair and parking area used by the local garage. In short, it's an ugly, run-down little patch. If approved, the whole appearance of Forge Lane would be far more attractive and the surrounding grounds maintained as a result of it. The derelict barn, one of the oldest buildings in the village, would be given a new lease of life and provide a focal point for the centre of the village and provide both BPC and residents with a much more needed community facility. The remainder of the site is hidden from public view and therefore we disagree with the damage to the AONB and the visual harm. The houses are in keeping with their surroundings and sympathetic to the area. It would also be noted that the immediate neighbours all support the application. The applicant has, outside of the formal planning application, offered the Parish Council the barn on a long lease to secure its future for the community at no cost for the Parish Council for an initial 5-year period. We understand that the applicant is happy for this to be provided in the way of a suitable planning condition, and the barn comes with 5 spaces for parking in addition with 8 extra on the site entrance. Although we do have a village hall, it's far too expensive for us and others to hire for short periods, the minimum charge being £80 for even a 30-minute slot. We have not held meetings there for many years, but instead use the school hall, but this is only available through term times. Previously, some meetings have had to be held outside of the village. The proposed community building will also be available for organisations such as Bredhurst Woodland Action Group, who we believe is in support of the application. In summary, we feel that the application would greatly improve the street scene of Forge Lane and provide an attractive centrepiece for the village. It will also provide a much-needed community facility and bring back to life one of our oldest flint buildings. BPC's primary aim is to preserve the rural appearance and character of our village, and for those reasons we want to approve the application. Whilst we appreciate the recommendation before you tonight is based purely on planning policy, every proposal must be judged on its own merits, and we believe that this application does not harm the AONB but in fact enhances it. Your decision tonight will have a huge impact on Bredhurst, being a small village, and should you approve it, it will bring enormous benefits to our village. So please listen to our village views, as we understand the views of our residents. Thank you.
Come now to Mr Page, a supporter of the application.
I'm not sure I can speak that fast, but I'll have a crack. My wife and I live at and own Green Court, which is a property which adjoins... Sorry, am I going? Sorry. So I say my wife and I live at and own Green Court, which is a property which adjoins the proposed development. As Nick has explained, the plot in question has a narrow frontage to Forge Lane, and at the moment, as you face it from Forge Lane, on the right-hand side, there's a car park area used by the local garage. In the middle, a semi-derelict barn or stable, and to the left, an area of scrubland. The proposal will replace the car park with an access drive, fully restore the barn, and landscape the land all around it. So the actual layout won't change much, but the visual impact from Forge Lane will be hugely improved. The plot then opens out behind Green Court. A lot of it is not visible from the road. It's largely overgrown land of no particular beauty or use. On 3 sides, there are already existing detached dwellings, and on the 4th side, a private road that goes to Condor House. It's an isolated area of land which is largely unnoticed by the public, and there's no continuous green space or buffer zone. The proposed development is entirely in keeping with the surrounding properties, and it will be attractively and sympathetically landscaped. And of huge importance to Bredhurst is the opportunity to have this barn restored, which was once part of Green Court, and to have it available as a meeting place and facility for the village. This is a wonderful opportunity to restore a historic building and have it available for community use. And how often does a village the size of Bredhurst have this sort of opportunity? Hardly ever. If we lose the opportunity, the area of land where the barn is, unlike most of the site, is within the village envelope, So almost certainly the owner would be able to get permission to demolish the barn and put up a detached dwelling. So then all you'll see from Forge Lane is another detached dwelling, and we'll have missed a great opportunity to restore a historic building and to have it available for community use. My wife and I strongly support this application, even though it closely affects us, because we believe it's in the best interests of Bredhurst, and we can't see that it in any way detrimentally impacts on an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's beneficial for Bredhurst. The visual impact from Forge Lane will be greatly improved, and it will make great use of an area of land which is isolated and currently of no particular benefit to anyone. So I would strongly urge.
Almost on time. Be it noted that because Councillor Harwood entered partway through the discussion under the protocol, he's not able to join us for the rest of this debate, unfortunately, and it's not because he's not interested. Right. We don't have a ward member present, as far as I can see, so the first person to indicate was Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like the planning officer to clarify something for me. You stated that none of the exceptions under EMV 28 apply here, but exception 4, the provision of a public or institutional uses, does that not apply to this application? Because there will be a public use coming from the renovation of this barn for community use. And I understand there's a second clause in there that says for which a rural location is justified. Well, what kind of justification is required? Because to my mind, the fact that there is a pre-existing derelict building there is some sort of justification, but that might not be a proper planning justification.
Thanks. I think the key point I would emphasise with the community building is that there is no objection in planning terms to the conversion of the single-storey barn to a community facility. However, in your officer's opinion, little weight should be given to the provision of that community facility in the planning balance for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not required to service the need created by the development, and there is no requirement for it under planning policy or any other planning reason. And as I mentioned, I won't repeat myself, but if it was put forward as part of a Section 106, it would not meet the tests of a Section 106 because it is not required. So while I accept that on the face of it, it could be seen to justify an exception under policy EMV 28, I think the fact the vast majority of sites has been put forward for residential use is the determining factor in this respect, and also the fact that the community building is not required in planning terms. And I suppose the question I would ask really is, would the proposal be considered acceptable without the community facility proposed? Because the weight one should give that, it's quite limited. I think the focus is really on the vast majority of the site, which would be residential in nature and outside the settlement boundary.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Burton, or do you wish to pursue the point?
I'm not entirely sure it does. No, I just want sort of fairly black and white. Does the inclusion of that community building come under exception 4 to EMV 28?
Thank you very much. Right. I will now take declarations of lobbying. I think most members have been lobbied by the applicant, apart possibly from substitute members. Will you lobby, Councillor Garland? No. Everyone except Councillor Garland. And I have to declare that I've separately been lobbied by one of the councillors for the ward against the application, Councillor Greer, who strongly voiced his opposition. Any other speakers? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. In reading the report, everything's a balancing act, and I think overall we have to take officers' advice whenever it comes to areas that we need to protect. And when I look at this proposal, we're looking at 5-bedroom houses. Is there a need for sort of people getting onto the housing ladder? How would that affect them? Would that be something that would help them? I'm just not convinced that the benefit is outweighed by the harm and that this could cause both at this point and potentially with other applications. So I'm willing to move that we take the recommendation as on the papers.
It would be as amended by the urgent update.
It would be.
Councillor Stockwell, do you wish to speak now or later?
Just very briefly, I totally support what Councillor Clark is saying. These are very substantial houses in the AONB, outside the village envelope as such. We've lost an awful lot of countryside already to the local plan and to local developments, and this is quite a big raft here. If it came in, I think as the officer said, as a conversion of a building to a community use, we would be looking at a different application, but totally support what you say.
Thank you very much. I'm sure I saw one or two other people indicate. Councillor Mumford, I thought I saw you indicate, but I could be wrong. Right. I'll bring Councillor Burton back in a minute. I'll just say that clear for myself, it is difficult sometimes, but a couple of points. It's never easy when you've got a site in the area of outstanding natural beauty, which is equivalent to a national park in terms of its planning importance. So a proposal to build in an AONB in the open countryside when you have a 5-year housing land supply has to be justified on its merits. We have had such proposals, and I dare say we will continue to have proposals that are justified on their merits, either by the architectural uniqueness of the buildings or by other benefits. It does not seem to me that the justification here is particularly strong. Unfortunately, the community benefit, although it is there, can't really be used in planning terms because pricing policy is not a planning consideration. I wish it were sometimes, but it isn't. So I will have to, with a slightly heavy heart, say that I, too, will be voting against this application. Because unfortunately, I think if we don't defend our policy here, it becomes much more difficult to do so elsewhere in the AONB, because this does not create a set of exceptional circumstances. Councillor Burton, you did wish to come back, and as no one else wishes to indicate yet, I will take it.
Thank you, Chairman. Whilst I understand everything that's been said here tonight, and I do understand the importance in planning terms of the AONB, I do think there is quite clearly from the speakers that we've had here tonight a benefit to be gained from approval of this application. Whilst AONB, as 4 letters, has great weight in planning terms, we've seen from the images and heard from the testaments that this is actually an AONB that could maybe do with a little bit of improvement. It's beset on 3 sides by development already, and the 4th side is a stone's throw away from the M2. I just think that, bearing in mind we don't actually set precedent with our decisions here, we could potentially have a strong justification for approving this because of the benefits from the community building. And that's why I will be voting against the recommendations.
Yeah, I think Matt, you'd have to argue that the benefits to the AONB, if you were going to actually substantiate and overturn that, because whilst the community benefit may be real in practical terms, because there is a community facility that does exist, it can't really be justified in planning terms. The unfortunate fact that the Village Hall Committee are charging an arm and a leg for it is unfortunately not a planning issue, and we cannot really take that into account. You will need to argue that the benefit is to the AONB in landscape and other terms, not the community benefit. Mr. Bolton, your near namesake.
Thank you very much. At least we're not sitting next to each other again. But I actually agree with Councillor Burton on this. I think that everything that I read is in favour of this application going through, with the exception of the fact it's in the AONB. And this is a report, I think the report's very fair, actually, although I disagree with the recommendation at the end, and makes it very clear that it is a very tight balancing act on this. But I'm sorry, I just come down on the side of development here. It makes sense. It is it's still enclosed. I think a lot of the issues that are raised in the report can be mitigated by conditions, and to me, it's a little bit clearer than perhaps others are seeing it.
No one else? Oh, Councillor Mumford.
I've been on the websites of Bredhurst and the Village Hall, etc. today after the lobbying, and there is a problem, and I do see the community benefit. However, sat here listening, I'm hearing a lot about the AONB, but we've got our policies in place, and they are countryside policies. And to allow that community benefit, we'd be trampling over the AONB, all of our countryside policies, the settlement boundaries that are so important to our villages, and that's ENV 28 and SP 17. We'd be trampling right across all of those. While I see the community benefit, I will be voting in favour of the motion, because I'm not prepared to do that.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else, so as nothing else has been moved, I will move to the vote on the motion that has been proposed to refuse planning permission for the ground set up out on the papers with the urgent update. All those in favour of the recommendation, please indicate. That's for refusal. Those against? Abstentions? No abstentions. That application is refused for the reasons stated. Councillor Harwood has now joined us for the final application, which is item 11 on page 34 of your reports. Right, members, I'll give people a minute or two to exit, but now back to the agenda. Agenda item 11, page 34, land at Hawthorne Place, Greenway, Forstall, Harwich. I will now ask the officer to introduce the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for a retrospective change of use of land as a residential caravan site for 2 gypsy families, each with 2 caravans, including not more than 1 static caravan for each family, the erection of an amenity building and laying out of hard standing. The proposal is located on the north side of Greenway Lane and is up this lane behind this existing mobile home, I think it is, on the site itself. The caravans, which are part of the, as I say, part of the application is retrospective, are shown behind a substantial hedge, and I'm pointing at them with the cursor here. The two tourers, and here they are again. Here, this is the view from the lane, the public right-of-way, and again across the shared access track, as has been shown previously. Oaklands Place is a site to the west, east. So the issues here are the proposal, well, retrospective proposal to consider the erection of these caravans and amenity block. The recommendation is to approve. This is quite a useful diagram, I think, to show the existing setup in the area. So the first photograph I showed you, Oaklands Place, which has a permanent permission of one static and one touring caravan. The site here behind currently vacant to allow one static and one additional touring caravan, and the proposed site to the rear of those two with the Garden of England caravan park shown to the southeast. The diagrams here show that layout in plan form. Amenity building, 2 mobile homes and 2 tourers, and again the site shown in red there. This is the small amenity block itself. So I think the key issues here are, while the site is not allocated for gypsy use, paragraph 5.04 of the report talks about the board principles under development plan policy and central government guidance, and I do have copies of the relevant material here, the planning policy for traveller sites, and our own topic paper 2006, which talks about the supply of pitches for gypsies and travellers, and the fact that it is the council's position that supply will continue to come forward on sites which are as yet unidentified, and that such identified need for pitches, which is, as I said, unmet, will be met by the end of the plan period, considering the trajectory of permissions that has already been granted. And I would point out in terms of a query that the temporary permission for pitches does not count towards the overall total of pitches. It's only permanent pitches which should be considered. In relation to this application then, while the implementation in advance planning permission is of course regrettable, it is not in itself something which should determine the committee's decision this evening. And we have been in contact with the applicants to tell them to cease any work in advance of any decision. In terms of their gypsy status, paragraph 5.16 of the report points out that the councils are satisfied that the applicants lead a nomadic habit of life and they fall within the gypsy status as defined in terms of the purposes of planning. The visual impact of the proposal is considered to be acceptable. Development does not appear to be unduly prominent or visually intrusive into the landscape, and it's considered that unrestricted permanent use of the site is acceptable in planning terms. There is no discernible effect in terms of residential amenity, highways safety, and any other considerations. And in conclusion, weighing up the material planning issues, it is considered that the application is acceptable, albeit that ENV 28 does apply, as is pointed out in the report. I think I'll pause there, Chair, and happy to try and answer any questions.
Right, thank you very much. We have only one speaker on this application, Councillor Janetta Sams of Harwich Parish Council.
Thank you, members. As I'm speaking on behalf of Harwich Parish Council, we request that this planning application be refused on the following grounds. A detrimental impact upon residential amenities, plus the visual and potential environmental impact of the development. Parish Council is concerned about a number of possible planning and environmental breaches at the site, which is adjacent to the Garden of England residential caravan park. 2 caravans are currently being serviced by a portable toilet positioned behind a lorry at least 50 yards away from the caravans, and the application makes no reference as to how this human waste is to be disposed of. Can we ask how and where the other waste materials from inside the caravans are being disposed of, for example, washing machine, water, kitchen and washing facilities? We understand that the matter has been referred to the environmental officers. The Parish Council Planning Group wanted to provide councillors with some background. Some of that obviously is already on the papers, stating about the conditions imposed by the Secretary of State and the last application in June, where Maidstone Borough Council approved the application. Reference to the previous application 14-500-696. There are 18 comments received from members of the public who live within the Garden of England Park home site, who clearly state they were concerned that relaxing the rules would result in many caravans being sited and not just the provision of a home for one family. The Parish Council believe that's relevant because the concerns expressed by those residents of the Garden of England are equally applicable to this application and with the benefit of time appears to be proven correct. Harwich Parish Council believes that the approval of the application will have a material impact on the character of the area and result in the loss of residential amenities for the inhabitants of the Garden of England. The Parish Council understand the pressures on authorities to provide sufficient gypsy and travellers pitches. However, approval for this site, together with the already approved adjacent application, could result in an over-concentration of travellers in an area adjunct to an AONB. In his report relating to the earlier application, the planning officer states that the anticipated shortfall of the 36 pitches will be more than delivered by the 41 anticipated in the local plan, so there is no pressing need to make an exception. And I'll draw your attention to the previous comments made by Councillor Springett regarding the phasing and meeting our needs early, therefore disadvantaging gypsy families in the future. Because this is a park retrospective application, Harwich Parish Council has requested an urgent stop notice to be placed on this site until these issues have been resolved. For all of these reasons we've cited, Harwich Parish Council asks you to refuse this application.
Thank you very much. Right, draw members' attention to the fact there is an urgent update on the papers on the very last page of the report, and I will take declarations of lobbying at this point if anyone has been lobbied. Councillor Clark, Councillor Mumford, Councillor Bolton, Councillor Prendergast and myself. Anyone else? No? No one's talking to you, Chris. Yeah, well, right. The first member to indicate was Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think if we look at the main objections which seem to be raised on the grounds of visual impact and residential amenity, I don't know if the office is able to go back to the photo which shows the difference in it's in comparison to where the Garden of England site is. That one there, which is not a gypsy site. That's correct. I'm satisfied, based on what I've seen there and the report in front of us, that it would be difficult to turn this down based on the grounds of residential amenity, bearing in mind the location of that site in comparison to the Garden of England site. It seems to me that the grounds of doing so would. In terms of visual impact as well, I mean, I note in 6.02 it's set back 65 metres from Greenway Lane, which is an awful lot. as we can see there as well, on many sides of the application. So I'm prepared to move the recommendations, including the urgent update, as on the papers in front of us.
Councillor Harwood, do you wish to speak at this point or reserve your...
Yes, please, if I may. As now, I've been quite unsuccessful getting to this planning committee for both the meetings, but I have trawled around to all the sites, though. I think this is a site you really have to come and look at, because I was aware of the sensitivities because of the proximity to the OMB and so on, so I trawled up Greenway Forster Road and looked at it. But actually, when you, as you point out, when you've got the Garden of England caravan park, and probably I was surprised by the impact actually from Mount Farm, from the industrial estate on Mount Farm, because you've got all the lorry cabs and things that park there. They're all much taller than the mobile homes on this site. And once the hedge has grown about another half a foot, you won't see the site at all from any angle. So with the proposal to bolster the hedge along the northeast and southeastern edges where there's two gaps, essentially these sites will completely disappear into the landscape. So, you know, even though I usually have real concerns about sites in the foreground of the AONB, I think for this one there is no harm. And we need to prove harm. I don't think the policy issues really come into it one way or the other with such a small expansion. But I think that there is no harm to the landscape, so therefore I'm quite happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harwood. Anyone else wishing to... Councillor Cox, please. One moment. And Councillor Cox was first, and then you, Mrs Stockwell.
It sounds really different. Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I'd just like to say that points were made about getting rid of any wastewater and sewage. I can see it is mentioned in the officer's recommendation, but I really do think we should be asking the applicants, professionals that come to us, to give a more full detailed drawing. Could you go back to the drawing? Because, no, not that one. That's definitely not a drawing, Tim. The actual drawing of the site. No. No. Is there? That one. That one. I would have hoped that the professional doing this, I think it's Mr Brown, would have shown where there is a possibility they could have a septic tank or a cesspit or whatever. And I think the fuller advice of how high some of the landscaping should be, it's not a very full drawing, really, for the amount of money that's paid. I'm sure that's nothing to do with us, but I think it would obviously help the applicants who come and listen to us when they hear us speak about these things. That's what their professional person should be doing for them, and that's showing them the detail of where these things should go, especially after the recommendations have been made on papers. But other than that, yes, happy to endorse.
If I may respond, yes, condition 7 does indicate that there is a reserved matter condition on treatment of foul sewage and water and waste disposal. Certainly we can have further discussions about how that's carried out, but professionally I think the reserved matter covers the point that's being raised tonight.
Thank you. I'm just really bringing this forward because I think it's, once we say yes, it's passed, we need to then obviously follow this up and make sure these things are done so that the residents can see that we are following these up and we are pursuing the recommendations that we made. Thank you.
Councillor Stockwell.
Been answered. Just that, one, is it a personal permission here to the applicant? And 3, I think is quite important. When it's no longer used, it reverts back to the land and everything is removed.
As it stands, it's not a personal permission. That's something that members can consider if you feel it's appropriate, considering the individual status of the gypsies concerned. So I would understand if that's something you wish to add.
in terms of number 3, that if they did move, it would revert back to what it was?
Personally, Councillor Stockwell, other members, I think the second point is important, but I'm struggling to see the justification for it being a personal condition. That's something we usually apply when there's a slightly higher degree of damage, shall we say.
Isn't that the new legislation that came out in August, was it? Isn't that not completely confined to gypsy and travellers? Could be anybody?
I'll bring the officer back in a minute, but...
With a very tenuous...
Yeah, generally speaking, if it's acceptable for this category of use, well, it would be acceptable for this category of use. Normally a personal condition is used where, for one reason or another, the personal family circumstances of the gypsy family, or such as an educational requirements for the children or something like that, would apply. The officer can correct me if I got that wrong.
No, that is correct, and I think while I accept if members wish to put forward a personal condition, condition 1 does say the site can only be occupied by persons who are defined as gypsies and therefore meet the criteria indicated that the applicants meet in paragraph 5.16. So my professional opinion is a personal condition is not required, and I think if the site is considered to be acceptable for this use, I think that is sufficient.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, usually with personal conditions, we're usually talking about where there is a, say for example, there is a high landscape and there's a reason, there are plenty of reasons to refuse on planning grounds, but, for example, there is the age of it, there is a person who's on there who's, lest I say, not going to be there for a particularly long period of time, then they will then a personal condition would be probably more appropriate. So if we're talking about the age of the individual, that sort of thing. But I don't think this is a situation where a personal condition to that extent can be imposed.
Just need to check that from the officer that the breaches that were referred to as a matter rightly of concern by the parish council would be or would not be resolved by the application, assuming the conditions are all implemented, of course.
Yeah, assuming consent is granted and the conditions are adhered to, then the concerns expressed in terms of a temporary toilet, etc., would be resolved by the implementation of the consent in front of you.
I just need to ask, as that is an important concern before we, do anything. Any Councillor Prendergast?
Just for absolute clarity, because a lot has been said about this application. We've hit our 5-year supply, so ENV 28 kicks in, yes? Because I only ask because 6 out of the 8 conditions that we have here say to safeguard the character and appearance of the countryside. So it's obviously a major issue here, and it does worry me that there is a recommendation for approval when harm to the countryside has been identified. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many conditions.
I think it's certainly ENV 28 is relevant to consider as part of the process surrounding this application. I don't think the application contravenes ENV 28. I think the conditions suggested are ways to ensure that through addressing issues which have been raised this evening and elsewhere, such as safeguarding of planting and landscaping materials. So I don't think the fact that those conditions are suggested indicates it is in contravention with ENV 28.
Although it would be in contravention if it didn't have the conditions, hence adding them. Any further comments? No, in that case I shall put the recommendation as amended by the urgent update to the committee. Those in favour of granting planning consent? Those against? 2. Any abstentions? I don't think... one abstention. Right, that concludes the... yes, that application is approved. And, but we will be watching to make sure that the conditions are adhered to. Right, back to the agenda. Chairman's announcements. There aren't any chairman's announcements. And as far as I know, there are no appeal decisions for this evening. So thank you very much for your input, officers, members, visiting members. Have a nice evening.